Hello, my name is Benji and welcome to Dice vs Cards. Today's topic is once again Marvel Champions and its growing hero pool. More specifically, we'll be analysing who are the grade A students and who the not so well tuned identities are. We'll be presenting this information in the form of a hero tier list. Now, if you've already watched last week's video that focused on the relative power of each identity in solo play, you'll know that we've sprinkled, or more accurately caked, this list in empirical data, provided by the excellent game login thread over on Boardgamegeek, run by Dormammu. It's a great tool for assessing relative win weights, not just by identities, but against scenarios and at different difficulties. I highly suggest you check it out and I'll put a link to it in the description. Rest assured, I'll be putting my 2 cents in as well as to why these heroes can be found in their relevant tier. But I think using a statistical base like this is much the better way to proceed. And as I've already mentioned, we've published the solos version of this list, but today's video will run us through the multiplayer power rankings. Although there is a reasonable correlation between degrees of quality, there's still a fairly clear distinction between the both. That will become clear as we go through, and with the most obvious being that solo identities need to be a bit more jack of all trades, whereas multiplayer heroes can afford to have a more singular role, as long as it's well complemented by its teammates. So with that out of the way, let's get from A to D. At the tippy top of A tier this time we find the Sorcerer Supreme, Doctor Strange, who has little to shout about on both sides of his card. A 2-1-2 stat line and 10 hit points is squarely in the what's all the fuss about category. But not only does his invocation deck have some great cards, albeit with varying degrees of situational quality, but his signature cards are by and large all pretty great too. What makes him stand out in multiplayer is just overall quality. He remains the strongest identity printed to date, and when he's most often paired with protection and leadership, he can fill wildly disparate roles, but both with the ability to tank and be self-sufficient. Doctor Strange could almost be in his own tier, but we're going to squeeze Spider-Man in here too, as he fares very well in terms of multiplayer performance, especially over his solo capabilities. His 1-2-3 stat line relies heavily on defending, but alongside his signature cards allows him to pack some proactiveness in there as well. Spidey is often paired with Justice to paper over the cracks of his low thwart characteristic, in so doing making him as much a standalone team player than anything else. But when paired with protection, which is a frequent choice, Spidey becomes Mr. Tank Duty, staying in hero form as much as possible to keep the threat manageable. We do then transition to B tier, which we'll find is quite a stacked rung on the ladder. As much to do with the lesser variance found in multiplayer win rates over the more swingy outcomes you can get in solo. First up here, and quite probably knocking on the tier above's door, is Spider-Woman, our first double aspect identity. Yes, you need to build around playing as many different aspects as possible on your turn, but it's relatively easy to get there and watch the fireworks go off. She's most often paired with aggression and justice, and so for the first time in this list, here we have a hero that's often given a particular role in multiplayer, and in these instances either damage dealing or threat control. With her signature stat line and ability, she's able to fill in a number of different roles, so expect her to be a favourite in multiple hero games for a long time to come. Next up is the genius billionaire philanthropist himself, Iron Man. It's his need for breathing room in the early game so that he can get up to full power that makes him a better choice in multiplayer than he is in solo. His futurist action is the main facilitator for getting him up to speed, and from there he can hold his own alongside and against anyone, with justice being the most favoured aspect, but with aggression and protection more or less sharing second place. We can see that he also fills a specialist function in multiplayer games, with the preference being using his adequate thwart and yellow bordered aspect cards to contain the villain's threat. Up next is the captain of the Marvel variety, echoing her position in B tier for both types of play. Now on the face of things she's just above average with a solid 2 thwart and 2 attack, let somewhat down by a defense of 1. But if you can abuse and readily use her rechannel ability for chip peeling and card draw, and return to her alter ego side for some impactful card draw, then the net result is magnifique. She's most often paired with leadership and aggression, which is a recurring theme at this point, and if you're a decent all-rounder then leadership is rarely a bad fit with its support-like nature, and aggression exemplifies the fact that you've got to win the game at some point. Then we come to Black Widow, who stands very strong in solo, but only marginally less so in multiplayer. An identity that can take some getting used to with her somewhat reactive playstyle. She's definitely a slow and steady wins the race type of hero, but also that little bit different to Pilot. There also aren't that many heroes that can readily influence and negate the encounter deck, and the fact that a number of those can be used to help anyone around the table is what keeps her station in multiplayer. Overwhelmingly picked with a Justice build, this makes her less tanky but still full steam ahead trying to stymie the villain and prevent the 2 lost conditions from happening. Rounding out B tier is the star of the show in solo play, Captain America. His even 2-2-2 stat line, which is really +1 defense with Cap's shield starting in hand, is coupled with his native ally discounting ability that helpfully applies to everyone. Flip him over and you see his readying capability makes him Vinny versatile. Another huge proponent of the leadership aspect for all the reasons we've covered and all the reasons you'd expect. His secondary option being protection affords him the ability to be a real team player and take the role of meat shield tanks a lot. That about does it for the cream that rises to the top, as we segue nicely into C tier, and starting with what is probably my least favourite hero, Thor. I know it's prejudicial against minions, but as soon as I saw his signature ability, I think I just shut down. The rest has some good, some bad, but either way you swing it, I don't like it. And when you think about the bigger picture, it's as if they overdid tuning down what you would call the demigod-like identities in Marvel Champions. It's always a problem tuning and balancing superhero games to keep things relative, but that's a discussion for another time, or maybe never. He makes best buddies with the aggression aspect though, and under the right circumstances can still be a stellar compadre. I'm sad to see our next face this low, as I think she's great design, but Ms. Marvel still has a favourable win rate in multiplayer over her adventures alone on the table. Again, I think part of her win rate can be attributed to the fact that she's not that easy to play. Cycling the deck for impactful events that can then ping back to your hand, not only making room for impactful cards to be used twice a turn, but giving you net resource gain out of it too. Used most often with everything but leadership, but marginally more so with aggression and protection, aka 2 sides of a coin. She can adapt to a front foot or back foot style of play in support of the team. Next up is Black Panther, who I think suffers in multiplayer from being a little bit inconsistent with his Wakanda Forever combo led playstyle. Don't get me wrong, he's a great hero, and you could argue that even when he's not performing optimally, the fact that he's one of many should help mitigate the loss in productivity. But still, the numbers don't lie, and it becomes less about him being bad and more about others being able to bring more to the table in multiplayer. Favouring leadership and protection aspects, there's nothing particularly noteworthy about King T'Challa's synergy with these 2 particular styles. It might be a touch unfair to put the rest of these guys in D tier, as the relative win rate variance isn't that significant between C and D, as I've already alluded to. But at the end of the day, these are the three heroes that, empirically speaking, are going to be the toughest to fit in to a winning multiplayer team. Representing the best of the worst then is She-Hulk. An identity I have a great deal of fun playing, but her teensy hero hand size and lack of thwart push her into the pigeonhole category. That being an aggression build that makes her a bit of a glass cannon, albeit one with a bit more consistency than someone else that turns green in their spare time. Sandwiched in the middle of D tier is the far too prone to getting ganked Hawkeye. The unfortunate looking 1-2-1 stat line and his basement level hit points are the primary contributors to his low placing, but his signature cards, to be fair, are really quite impressive. His suite of arrows and one of the best allies in the new Mockingbird at his disposal mean he's not all downside. Being a big fan of the leadership aspect is normally a reason why you're good in a multiplayer environment. But the problem with Monsieur Barton is that he needs those allies and leadership staples to keep himself alive more than he can use them to bring synergy to the team. Alas, every list has to have a wooden spoon, and once again it pains me to say it, but it's the mean green Hulk that's propping everyone else up. Still, at least in this list he gets a grade, unlike in solo where his sub 50% win rate left him ungraded. As it stands though, Hulk is the hero most in need of a balance errata. Yes, he's not been released that long and his signature cards you can work with, but you can notably improve this guy just by tweaking one or both sides of that one identity. Still, if you pair this guy with aggression and the right teammates, very few heroes are capable of churning out so much damage in just the one turn. So there you have our first attempt at a multiplayer centric hero tier list. I'm surprised at some of the final placings, but as I said last time, more information is better than less. So what do I know? However, that's it from me. I'll see you next time.